Welcome to LexIcon, your visual guide to public international law. Our topic for today is a very brief history of international law, so let's begin. The whole timeline can be roughly divided into 5 periods based on defining historic events. First is the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, second, the end of the First World War in 1918, then the end of the Second World War in 1945, and finally, the end of the Cold War in 1990. So let's begin with the first period. The international agreements were signed and diplomatic relations existed also before, but the Peace of Westphalia has put an end to the 30 Years' War. It was first a civil war of a religious nature between Protestants and Roman Catholics, but then it grew larger and became a fight for power in Europe. So Peace of Westphalia is considered to be a beginning of a modern international system. More precisely, it is a series of peace treaties. It has put an end to the 30 Years' War and the 80 Years' War. It was an end of the religious clash. Minority religions were allowed and religious tolerance was established. A new balance of power in Europe was established as well, and the concept of state sovereignty was introduced. So what is state sovereignty? It is one of central concepts in international law, the ultimate authority of decision-making over individuals living in a given territory. In other words, it is the right to govern without outside interference, be it political, legal, religious, or other. But we now come back to the timeline and let's consider the next period. What are the features of that period? First is the European superiority. Dominant states are located in Europe. Second, colonialism. It is a politico-economic phenomenon characterized by European nations dominating smaller states in Africa and Asia. So the world is being cut in pieces like a cake or pizza. Third, domination of Christian faith, and thus international law was also based on Christian principles. But let's now move further into the interwar period. 1917, February and then October revolutions take place in Russia, and the Tsarist regime is overthrown. A year later, the end of the First World War became a turning point in the history of international law. Shortly afterwards, the influence of the United States increases, and the Soviet Union is born as a separate legal entity. This means that the European states are no longer the only key players on the international arena. In 1920, a League of Nations is established. League of Nations is an intergovernmental organization with the primary aim of maintaining international peace and security. Its constitutive document is the Covenant of the League of Nations, and it also had its own judicial body, Permanent Court of International Justice. And why is that considered so important? Because it was a fundamental change in the legal thinking. The world finally understood that the war shall be prevented, that disputes shall be settled in ways other than the use of force, by negotiations or other diplomatic means. This has also become a shift from classical bilateral model towards multilateralism. But shortly after that, in 1939, another war happened. So the commitment to prevent another war has failed, and so has the League of Nations. United States was not a member, so the credibility of the League was questioned. The Soviet Union was expelled, some other countries withdrew voluntarily, and it also had other institutional problems. So in 1945, another organization was established called the United Nations. United Nations is an intergovernmental organization, and it is a successor to the League of Nations. Established right after the Second World War, because there has been a clear and strong agreement that the use of force is completely unacceptable. With initially 50 members, it now has 193 full member states and 2 states having the observer status. It also has a principal judicial organ, the International Court of Justice, to the judgments of which I will be referring a lot in future videos. So approximately 1947, the Cold War begins. It is a period of strong geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. Around that time, the process of decolonization begins. Former colonies gain independence, therefore the number of states increases. Approximately in the 1950s, many new international organizations appear, such as the European Coal and Steel Community, something that will later transform into the European Union, or the Council of Europe, which is a big intergovernmental organization protecting human rights in Europe. Late 1980s is a period of growing political instability in Central and Eastern Europe, and the culmination of that instability is the breakup of the Soviet Union. Thus, the Cold War has ended. So we finally come to the last period, from the end of the Cold War up until present. It's characterized by a large number of actors. States, international organizations, corporations, even individuals play a big role. The balance of power has changed, the world is no longer bipolar, and authors still argue who's more powerful. Classical bilateralism is replaced with multilateralism. There's also a trend of regionalization. Regional problems are being solved on a regional level. Existing institutions and organizations are being criticized. Recall Brexit, for example. New legal problems appear, such as international terrorism, cybersecurity, environmental issues, you name it. Consequently, new branches of law appear. Law becomes more specialized because we need to adapt to these new developments. That was it for today. I hope this video was useful. Subscribe to this channel and see you very soon.